I'm Dane Rose, and the first place I want to begin with exploring sexual abuse is the intelligence equation. Intelligence can be measured by the efficiency with which energy is transformed into sustainable well-being. An intelligent culture, relative to other cultures, extracts more sustainable well-being per unit of energy invested than stupid cultures, than unintelligent cultures, than less sophisticated cultures. So energy comes in different forms. One is natural resources, sunlight, trees, uranium, all the various minerals, etc. on the planet. So all the natural resources available to us, water, wind power, etc. Sustainable well-being has multiple dimensions. So first of all, sustainable well-being is a pattern of activity that grows with time. Nature is sustainable. If you leave nature alone without any human interference for 500 years, it will be more complex, more vibrant, and humming along beautifully in the endless creation of anomaly and the competition within those anomalies for intelligence. Nature breeds intelligence because if one form of animal outruns another form of the same animal over time, the one form of animal will tend to dominate or tend to expand. And the less intelligent forms of energy and species, etc., will tend to diminish. So nature is a producer of intelligence. And nature has produced the human being. And human beings have created culture, a synthetic set of guidelines, a synthetic model of reality to bring certain things into focus with the idea that the culture or cult will help its people to sustainably grow. Nobody says, I'm really proud of this culture because I believe if I do what my culture says, I'll be dead in a very short period of time, and so will everyone else around me. No one says, I'm happy to be part of this culture because this culture behaves in such a way that it is systematically bound to create high levels of misery for all involved, and we're all going to work very hard to deliver that effect. For a cult to be sustainable, it has to make a promise to its people. Join us, be like us, copy us, do what we do, a cult says to its children, and your life will get better. Do what we do, and your well-being will go up. It will go up more than if you do your own thing or go be part of one of those other weird cults. Within cult framework that is self-referential, other cults are always weird because they're different. That's weird food because it's different. Never mind that rice and fish and tofu and seaweed make a Japanese culture less obese than an American culture. It's weird. And that's really all a cult needs, to filter out stuff that doesn't belong to part of its cult. However, intelligent cults, to the extent that they exist, develop memes, develop patterns of interaction that take less and less energy, time, money, and natural resources to create more and more sustainable well-being. Now, chauvinistic cults are cults in which masculine energy, and often men, are valued more than feminine energy, and often females, irrespective of the underlying science. Now, the cult-like element is the part that diverges from science but is self-referentially and dogmatically maintained. So there's no question that the fastest runners in the world today are men, and that's why you have an Olympics for men, and you have an Olympics for women. Similarly, you have a disabled Olympic. If you can be the best performer of this particular thing in a wheelchair, or the best swimmer without legs, or whatever it is, that is still a tremendous accomplishment. But scientifically, you can say that the male set of genes are creating the fastest runners on Earth, often from the African continent at this point. And that's science. But what you cannot say scientifically is that the focus on the outer world to the exclusion of the inner world, the outer world in this polarity being masculine, the inner world being feminine, the outer world being physical, the inner world being psychological, the world of the psyche. One cannot make a scientific case to say that the feminine domain of consciousness is less relevant to well-being than the masculine domain of consciousness. Nor can you make a scientific assessment that male nurses are better nurses in competency than female nurses. Nor can you say that men are better at rearing men and women than women are. So Chauvin was a Frenchman, and the bit that is dogma is the artificial, dogmatic, self-referential elevation of men and that which is masculine above women and that which is feminine. And I differentiate those two because femininity, or yin energy, or yin traits, or yin domain, exist in men and women, as do yang traits, yang domains, yang activities. Running in the outer world is a yang expression relative to contemplation. Voicing is more masculine than stillness and silence. Speaking is more yang, more masculine than listening. Initiating is more masculine than responding. Leadership is more masculine than following. Teaching is more masculine than learning. In any exchange, giving is more masculine than receiving. In any human interaction, the yin and the yang is represented equally, meaning a scientist will tell you that you cannot give without someone receiving. If you say, here's my gift, and the other person says, go fuck yourself, you haven't given a gift. The other person has to receive it. And if you say, here's what I have to say, and there's no listener, there's no communication. Someone has to be listening. And so what science breaks down symmetrically into two equal parts, chauvinistic cultures exaggerate and elongate into a vertical relationship in which one is better than the other. And chauvinistic cultures create systematic suffering on many dimensions of human interaction as a result of this emphasis. And one can see this in geometric terms. If you take the round wheels of our cars and apply dogma, ignoring the science will tell you that symmetry and balance creates the most ease while driving. But a chauvinist will say, I don't care about science and balance and all of that. This is better than that. And so if you exaggerate one side of a car wheel and diminish the other side of the car wheel, so that you have 4 tires on a car that are all 80% emphasizing one side of the tire and diminishing the other, and you try and drive at high speeds, you will have an incredibly dangerous, incredibly violent vehicle. And so in that domain, we are intelligent, meaning the fact that we do not divide half of the tire and make it small and divide the other half of the tire and make it big and then drive around in ridiculous wheels that don't work is a sign of intelligence. But the fact that in education systems we do the exact opposite is a sign of stupidity. Because in education, quote unquote, you will learn mathematics, you will learn geometry, you will learn algebra, you will learn trigonometry, you will learn fractions, and you will learn history, and you will learn to read, and you will learn to write, and you will learn to competitively interact in some way with another team in some sport or other. Just about every country has its sports. But nowhere in that mix of mental, externally focused sciences will you learn anything about the more important sciences of human relationships, trauma repair, sexual abuse, the repair of sexual abuse, empathic versus sociopathic cultures, and you will not learn the underlying science of intelligence. You will not critically examine the amount of energy your cult produces and consumes, and how much well-being is extracted mentally, emotionally, and physically for those involved. You will not learn why it is that an American consumes 1,000 times more energy than the Native Americans that once graced these lands, only to produce 102 tons of energy called garbage by the end of their life, and is still unhappy a large percentage of the time. You will not learn about intelligence, because intelligence requires an inner and outer equation. And in chauvinism, the inner equations are discounted to a point where they don't seem to matter at all. And so you have chauvinism equals valuing the masculine more than the feminine, independent of science, equals and leads to ignorance of feminine domains, the art of listening, the art of presence, spontaneous time versus structured time, measuring emotions as much as you measure finances, measuring energy levels as much as you measure stock prices, equals disrespect. That which you don't understand and don't see, you disrespect. To spect, to see in Latin, respect, to continually see. Chauvinism creates a blind spot where large portions of the human felt experience go invisible and thus are disrespected. When you can't see something, you bump into it, you violate it, creating violence. It's a form of incompetence. Incompetence in a shame-based culture. Now, when you are an emotionally illiterate that is involved in dishonor and disrespect of the feminine, you will fail. But you'll also be ignorant of the dynamic of shame, which is one of a cult's primary self-reinforcing mechanism. So it creates shame. But not knowing something in a chauvinistic paradigm is low-ranking. To admit that you don't know something is to admit that you're in feminine terrain. Because the known, the particle, the object, is masculine. The unknown, which is much bigger than the known, is feminine. And in a chauvinistic culture, to be found out in the domain of mystery is a shameful experience because the cult has convinced everyone in the cult to look at not knowing as less valuable than knowing. Now, in order to honestly know something, you have to stay very small, because less than 1% of reality is known. Meaning, if you measure any field in its entirety, less than 1% of it is known. Less than 1% of the universe is known if we're measuring physical space. Less than 1% of cult awareness is known in most individuals occupying a cult. There have been 10,000 cultures on this planet alone in known history. 10,000 cultures. We don't know many of them at all. And the ones we think we know, because we know a few dates about them, we don't really know about the evolution of hierarchy of values. So we know less than 1% about almost everything. So in order to stay in the known terrain and gain rank, one has to stay in a small terrain that is familiar. And that's one of the things that cults provide. So it leads to shame when we don't know what we're doing in these domains. And rather, at a shame point where you admit that you don't know something and you are incompetent, this is the beginning of a grand adventure, a hero's journey, or it is the beginning of manipulation of data. Because if you cannot admit that you don't know what you don't know, and you feel shame around the incompetence of stuff that your cult has not taught you, you're going to suppress data, which is where we get into the cult defense system, where you have regions of science, regions of sociology, regions of government, regions of families, and regions of individuals, where we don't know what the fuck we're doing. I have no idea why, just as I meet someone really amazing, I am incredibly rude to them. I don't have a clue. Because I'm moronic and ignorant in feminine terrains, the science of my own psyche. I have no idea why my government subsidizes the companies that are damaging the environment the most and does all kinds of bizarre machinations to stop innovation when we claim to be an innovative country. This doesn't make any sense. I've no idea why the one truth teller in our family is turned into the black sheep and taboo to talk about. I've no idea why sexual abuse in an abuse cult that has been going on for hundreds of years ruins life after life, and nobody's talking about it and learning the science of response. Because here's one of the interesting things about sexual abuse. 5 minutes can destroy a lifetime. If you look at the Tara Reade story and the setup, you can see that 5 minutes of being violated by Joe Biden, 5 minutes of his chauvinism, of his cruelty, of his shame, and of his data suppression and corruption of power, destroyed a woman's life. Now, you can look at this as an individual phenomena and say, what incompetent cultures do is they blame a scapegoat. This never works, by the way, but if you're incompetent, you don't know you're incompetent. And so it can seem to work. And if you don't gather the data to understand that you are incompetent but didn't know it, it can work for a long time. And so what happens in a lot of these situations, so Tara Reade was moved into a first in office to punish her and then told to get another job. And then when she came out, she wouldn't be supported because of the political power structure, of who funds what nonprofits. And then she's threatened because the power structures that want Biden to be elected do not want her story coming out. So she has to be scapegoated upon scapegoated upon scapegoated upon scapegoated. But who's the real villain in the story? The stupidity of the cult. Joe Biden did not get any healing for the shame dumped on him by an abusive father and an abusive cult. Joe Biden didn't get any emotional literacy. Joe Biden did not get any data about the hundreds of years of sexual abuse of women and how it destroyed their lives. Joe Biden did not learn traumatic repair in school. Joe Biden did not get repaired from his own traumas in school. And neither did Tara Reade get any training on what to do if a powerful person abuses you, how to predict the dynamics of power in government. She got no training about the very reality that any violated woman in a differential of power relationship is likely to face in this country. Well, this has been going on for hundreds of years, but it is suppressed within the education protocol, and so it continues. A profoundly stupid, meaning if intelligence is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being, you have a very small amount of energy, 5 or 10 minutes of Joe Biden's time, 5 to 10 minutes of Tara Reade's time, being organized in such a way that it will almost certainly damage and destroy a woman's life for decades. Now that's worth noting. What if you had, in a chauvinistic paradigm, a scenario that had been happening for hundreds of years, where a 5 to 10 minute interaction between a client and a company destroyed the company for decades, reduced their income by 50%, just totaling company after company after company after company. And all the investors lost all their money because the education training for both clients and companies was so incompetent that despite the dictates of intelligence that says that you must study this formula if you do not want to have decades of failure and misery with no benefit. So Tara Reade and Joe Biden were both losers. He felt rejected and stupid and awkward. She felt confused and overwhelmed and worthless. His career is being damaged. Her career was knocked down multiple times by this. And every single person in the circle is an accomplice by causing or allowing the cult doctrine that sets up this particular drama to play out over and over and over and over and over and over and over again in every single generation in which it's not addressed. The villain, if there is one, is the stupidity and cruelty of a cult that will not bring science into feminine terrain, into the terrain of the felt human experience within a paradigm of looking at the amount of energy it costs to create massive amounts of pain, and the amount of energy it costs to create massive amounts of sustainable well-being, and choreographing the science of interaction to be one that sustainably creates massive amounts of well-being per unit of energy invested by A, identifying pitfalls. These are all the interactions that statistically lead to massive amounts of chronic pain. These are all the interactions that sustainably lead to high levels of well-being. And these are the interactions that can go either way, and these are the variables that bring that up. Now, 75% of a person's income, according to data, is directly correlated to their social skills. Their relationships, their ability to create good winning relationships, to navigate conflict, to be liked, all of this. So it is unscientific to have an education protocol that does not include a single competent hour of relationship skill building. So here's 75% of your income in a capitalist framework is determined by social skills, and we're not going to teach you a single bit of science in any objective way. You may learn bullying, you may learn politics, you may learn that you have to lie in order to not be humiliated. You may learn all kinds of dysfunctional things in high school and college and dealing with your abusive parents and this and that and the other. But parents are not going to learn how to be parents. Kids are not going to learn how to recover from abuse at home. Bosses are not going to learn how to not abuse their employees or understand the data. And people are going to be thrown together in a dishonorable, ignorant state and invited to play dice. Now, the probability field is the statistical backdrop. So depending on who you count and in what way you count it, somewhere between 25 and 33% of Americans have participated in our current definitions of sexual abuse. So 1 in 3 Americans has either abused someone sexually or been abused sexually. Now, how is it that when this affects people for a lifetime and requires extra money, usually for the person who's left carrying the burden of abuse, producing less for the economy, having higher levels of depression, higher levels of suicide, higher levels of addiction, all which destroys the next generation of children? How is it that this goes unexamined as one of the highest priorities in the cult and within the education system of the cult? It's not intelligent. This is where we get into corruption of power, because in a shame-based cult, you can imagine that there's a very high likelihood that by the time someone gets to the top of the pyramid of any power structure within a chauvinistic cult, that they have participated in sexual abuse. They've allowed it, they've sought it out, they've initiated it, they've watched it, they've covered up for their bosses sexual abuse. That to climb power within a sociopathic paradigm where I will scratch your back if you scratch mine means that by the time you're at the top of the pyramid, you're carrying secrets inside and out of this issue. And in a shame-based, ignorant culture where you scapegoat and punish the symptoms rather than address the issue systematically, whoever reveals that they are infected with the disease, because it is a disease of violation, chauvinism, and sexual abuse, is targeted for punishment and isolation. Whoever reveals that they are a carrier, and we've got 33% disease, or have been a carrier at one point in the past, is scapegoated, or the data is ignored, silenced, and the person is smeared to protect a power figure from being associated with a disease that is rife within the cult itself, that is produced by the very chauvinism that underpins the cult. Well, you're going to then have dynamics where I'll scratch your back, you'll scratch mine, and the person that gets the full burden of punishment will be the least powerful in the dynamic. Because in a sociopathic system, the powerful seek bargains with the powerful for their own benefit. And anyone that has no power to offer is just thrown to the side to be used, isn't important. And there is a collusion within the entire cult that says that I will cause or allow the most vulnerable people in the cult to suffer the most, as long as that is in the interest of the powerful that can scratch my back if I agree to shut up about the obvious insanity in the room. Now, the reason that I'm focusing on this, and I've been a part of sexually abusing people and of being abused, starting in childhood. The reason that I'm focused on this is that I've found myself just as puzzled, scared, shamed, and completely incompetent on both sides of that continuum. Meaning, when I abused people sexually, I didn't understand that what I was doing was abuse. Because the woman said yes when she shouldn't have, when she had a history of trauma, when she had a history of sexual abuse. And the way I noticed it was I'd be with someone and then I'd feel they'd just gone. It's like there was no one home. And when I inquired, it's like, yeah, I didn't really want this. I just thought you did. And I didn't have the detection system. Nor did I understand my responsibility in an abuse culture to screen and understand who I was dealing with before I engaged in a way that for sexual abuse survivors is statistically probable to re-traumatize, create shame, create fear, create dissociation. In other words, I didn't know how to do my job in an abuse cult as a lover. And so I didn't know how to support women to do their job in taking care of themselves. And they didn't know how to do their job taking care of themselves in a cult that rewarded them for abuse and silence and punished them for speaking up. And when I have been sexually and emotionally abused by women, I didn't know the language or how to screen or talk about it either. And when I communicated the trauma, the pain, the grief of being sexually and emotionally abused by women and by men, my community did not know how to respond and support me. And there's only one of two ways one can go down. You can either label every single one of the entire people in these dynamics an asshole, that were basically fundamentally bad people and were born bad and we should all be what? Thrown in jail, publicly humiliated, disinvited from the parties. So this is a process of continually creating the illusion of garbage. We create large amounts of natural resources in forms we don't know what to do with, and we say, I know, we'll call it garbage and stick it in a landfill or an incinerator and consume vast amounts of natural resources to pollute the environment. And we think that's intelligent. We can also do that with the social ecosphere. We can take massive amounts of misfits and renegades and cult taboos and throw them out of the cult, creating the illusion of garbage, and then spend massive energy putting up walls so they can't be in with the cool crowd, and more energy can be spent to put people in literal or social or economic prison as outcasts. Or we can address the real issue, which is the underlying cult. That as long as we have a cult that does not treat trauma, chauvinism, abuse, PTSD, and sexual and relational and communication ignorance as the single biggest threat to species survival, and respond with competent education in that domain, we will produce large amounts of statistically predictable individuals who will violate other people and not know what they're doing, and who will be violated and not know what they're doing, in a cult that doesn't know how to respond effectively to such violation. And every single person in a cult is responsible for either actively reinforcing the stupidity, the cult-like nature of the cult, and in allowing the stupidity, it's not my problem, I'm not going to own the system that I'm a part of, or in upgrading the cult with science, using data. If you run a company and you're a true chauvinist, and so you understand that money is more important than the people who make it, and you have data that a very specific 5-minute interaction is going to cut the value of your company for the next 20 years, then you're a fucked up chauvinist. You can't even chauvinistically do the right thing for your company. And you will be gotten rid of by other chauvinists who care about money more than human beings, and who want their company, their money, run right, not reduce the risk. Well, in a truly scientific framework where human beings are more valuable than the money they make, and in which human well-being, which is correlated to the quality of relationships, is more valuable than money, which is only a servant in the goal of sustainable well-being, sexual abuses and emotional and relational illiteracy will be addressed scientifically at a level of competence such that the psychological dimensions of human experience go up 700% in many cases, with no additional natural resources, but a greater investment of time, which is not painful, it is a joyful investment of time. The learning process is as fun as the ultimate result of sustainable, healthy relationships as the norm in our cult.